Well, I'm happy to be here. We got plenty to talk about, and who better to listen to than us three?
For
All
sure,
right.
yeah, we got always lots to say, and I think it's always a good time to have a conversation because you mentioned I've seen a couple of your LinkedIn posts. This is the time of the year where it's almost like holiday period, right? Where it's like the best and worst time for strength coaches out there because
Right.
either they're excited because they're in a new job, or they're upset and a bit worried because they've been fired or removed from their job. So there's lots of different things that we can always talk about. And we did actually a podcast with Josh Heidegger a couple of weeks
hmm
back, and
hmm
referenced his journey between leaving a job that he'd been in a while at USC compared to now where he's in a smaller school up in Boise. And I know you've spoken about it yourself, and you and I have had many a conversation helping each other out throughout over the years about. But talk to us more about, you know, what people are going through right now and your experiences between the time that you had left your previous job and getting to the Angels. I think it's like a nice little it would be nice for people to hear, like someone that's gone through it, yeah, with your experience.
I'm flattered and pleased and uh, sad that I have to be able to present this as reality, right? Typically over the 40 years, I've decided my own path. Um, and then all of a sudden, in my 42nd year, new leadership takes over at the school I was at, and decided to change the senior staff, and we were all at will. So it wasn't a contractual thing. They have it in classifications in California, in the California state system. And anyway, I was out of work, and by out of work I mean no paycheck for 7 months, until Dynamic Fitness and Strength ended up boarding me on as a Southwest manager of this territory, which was, I'm grateful for them bringing me on, and I like their product, and that was good. But I will say, going backwards, like you said, I put that post out, and I knew I was going to put it out at sometimes, Michael, and I didn't know when. But I just was sitting there a couple of 3 days before Christmas, and I was thinking, wow, man, a couple of years ago, Christmas really wasn't a celebratory time for me. I tried to do my best with it, but it's a scary thing, man. I mean, even after 40 years, so you can imagine when what somebody feels like in their 10th or 15th year. Like, what does this mean? I've already seen lots of people come and go, and certainly counseled, discussed, talked, chatted, soothed, motivated those who would call me, hey, coach, I want to let you know that I didn't get my contract renewed, or I got fired, or whatever. And now I was that person, and I can tell you it was uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable and dark. Now, certainly the way I explained it was, and certainly don't want to dismiss the fact that people get to really dark places that can be harmful and harmful to themselves and others. But I wasn't about to harm myself. I think I'm too vain for that. So I kind of gathered some inner strength, and my wife and friends and all that in that post and LinkedIn, and I encourage everybody to take a look at it to see exactly what that looks like. But it's tough, and so I felt like, wow, this is the time to put that out. This was exactly the time, and it only took me a day to write that. And with a couple of edits, I put it out, and um, I'm also pleased for those who saw it, and I think it may have helped because it ended up getting 10,000 hits on it. So it ended up be something that was important. Typically you put out a bench press program and you get 1,000 hits. Well, this thing was near to dear to many hearts, I guess, and they probably were in the same situation as I was, or the reverse. And it's something we don't talk about, but we should, because I think talking about it is what makes you feel better, right? Things that you and I have talked about, things that I've talked about with others. It's almost like when you're talking to somebody about it, or finding that somebody else is going through the same thing that you went through, and you had no idea. It's soothing in a way, right? It's like pain free. It's almost like an anesthetic, like you just kind of, okay, well, then you move on, and eventually, you get out of the funk and you move forward. You know what that's all about, because that's how we coach, right?
Yeah, it's thing about the perception that I always talk about. We're in a perception-based industry where, like, people look at certain jobs out there and and that's probably the fault of social media to a degree. But how often, and I can, be one to blame because I do this myself. But it's like how often you see someone with high-profile job, and you're like, oh man, like they must be on a shit ton of money, or they must be living a good life. But in reality, they're not earning any money. They're working 100 hours a week. They hate their life. And then, it's like the whole perception is like, well, this couldn't ever happen to someone as experienced as Bob, or this couldn't happen to anyone as experienced as, Coach X or whatever. But it doesn't discriminate, does it?
No, man, no, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. And I again, I started looking into it wasn't self-help as much as I wanted to see, as we do anyway, right? We always look to see what, success has, leaves clues. Successful people leave clues. Success itself has clues. So you want to find out, how did that person do that? So I kind of wanted to find out what that all meant, and at the same time realize that, these people that I'd been still think about when I walk in podcast and follow them, as Peter Crone, Ed Milet, Tom Bilyeu, um, Trevor Moad. These guys, were really helpful, and Steve Harvey even. I mean, these guys were living out of their cars, and it's like Steve Harvey says, he meets a lot of people who say, well, tell me your story. Hey, I want to be a millionaire too. That's what I want to do. And he's like, hey, man, you don't, there's, it doesn't just happen. He said, man, he goes, it took me 20 years to be a millionaire, and here's a guy who was living out of his car for a couple of years. And so I'll tell you what I did learn, though. The biggest thing I learned, and I'll tell anybody out there who wants to hear it, and I don't care how much money you're making and how much you love your place and how much, they tell you you're the greatest and all that. You should at least spend an hour a week looking at employment opportunities. At least, that's yourself. You owe that to yourself, just like you do. All of us always schedule time to get a workout in, right? We schedule time to, to go to the local pub or, socialize. But you need to have an hour where you just say, okay, I'm just going to look, not necessarily for any one thing, but what's out there for me. In my case, I'm looking for leadership roles. I'm looking for something that's in my repertoire, which is athletics, but not necessarily strength and conditioning. I've looked at things other than that too, but something that was in a leadership role and was a little bit akin to groups, teams, things like that. That's the only thing I look back on and think, okay, well, I'm never going to do that again, because I got totally taken off guard. I was caught off guard completely. No sign at all from leadership at the time that, hey, you may want to go look, or we're going to make a change. Not one thing was said. And that's not their fault. That's my fault. And so I would just say, in those cases, man, keep looking every week, because you never know what's going to fall out. You just never know. I mean, your best job is just, your best situation for you. And I learned this from Ed Mylad is one more. The term one more. Your one phone, and as the entrepreneurial spirit lives in Evan and those in this unbelievable Valor company, is you're one phone call away, you're one contact away, one email, one text message, one greeting, one introduction away from greatness. You never know when it's going to happen. So that's what you got to do. You just keep looking and looking, and then hopefully you don't have to say, "Hey, this is what I went through," and you can help others. But that's the biggest thing I would say. But you're very right that I was, I wouldn't say astounded, but very surprised about some big names that you all know that I won't divulge here. Like, oh yeah, I remember doing that too. I said, you did? Yeah. Oh yeah, I was walking, I was waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, my heart racing. Wow, oh really? Yeah, and it's and they never told anybody. And so, I mean, I guess this is what we do, right? I mean, maybe it's so common when guys lose their jobs, they just don't talk about it. I think it should be quite the contrary, and I can tell you that from experience.
Gotcha, yeah, yeah. I was to your point though about like, greatness. You always hear about, whether it be the greatest athletes or the greatest leaders or whatever, they're the ones that evolve, right, to whatever certain situation. You could argue that strength and conditioning hasn't really evolved much over the years, like what, the Boyd Epleys of the world were doing back in the 60s and the 70s and 80s. I think you're I don't know, we talked about this before, the quote, it's like, tell me what you're doing today and I'll tell you what we called it 20 or 30 years ago. It's like, why do you think the strength and conditioning industry hasn't evolved as much as maybe other industries out there? What do you think's the reason for that? And what do you
Oh,
think to like get to that level? Because like you said, we're ever changing. You know what I mean? Coaches are getting smarter. They are know more information or enough to be dangerous. We have to be more wise. We have to be more educators, but we tend to still stay at that particular narrow view of coaching. Like, why do you see that? What's going on?
well, that's an easy one for me. There's no unity in the profession, zero, right? And I think part of that is just stupidity. The other part of that is ego, and I just think the last part of it is hi- historical reference, tradition for some reason, right? But I say that a little bit in slight because I can tell you that back in the 80s, mid 80s, and up until the probably 2000s, early 2000s, the strength and conditioning folks were pretty tight. Like, whenever, and I'm talking about in every sport, but, football was really running the strength and conditioning, movement at the time in the 80s. It was, the head strength coach was usually the head football strength coach. And then he had the department, then he had an assistant who helped him with football and then did the other sports as well. And that was my scenario at UCLA. But when we flew in for a game on Saturday, Friday night, we all met every damn time for dinner. Beers, fun, staying out late, doing all the things that comrades do. Met at the 50-yard line to to say, good luck, and met after the game on the 50-yard line at the end every time. Got into baseball in '93, same thing. I helped with Steve Odgers and Fernando Montes to form the PBS CCS. At the time, we started out with our meeting at the Disneyland Hotel, where we broke into a conference room with with a with a cooler full of beer, and we found a whiteboard and some erasers, and we just said, "Okay, you get up on the board and show us what you do with your pictures." So 8 people, eight. That was it. And as we grew, we were all together. We did everything together. And we when we came into town, if it was an evening, we had dinner together. The next, if it was too late, we had lunch before the game at the stadium somewhere together. Came out on the field. We were there in town to have fun and to compete and to enjoy each other. My program wasn't competing against your program. It's just the way it goes, right? You just do your thing. But they were very tight knit group at the time. I see that as being lost. I don't know that, I'm not saying that people don't hang out, but when I go to the meetings now, I don't see camaraderie the way I used to see it. Not at all. I mean, I know there's the groups are bigger, so the intimacy is a little different, right? Because now, there was only one strength coach at every team. So there's 30 of us, and then you got 30 minor league directors, right? Now it's bigger, a lot more people. There's two strength coaches at least at most places, and maybe three at the big league level. But I don't think anybody's going out to the middle of the field or Friday nights coming in because you got these big meetings and it's a big goddamn deal. Like it's not a big deal at all. I tried to get somebody to come out to center field to meet me during the game. My first year back after 13 years, I've seen guys, I've heard of names, but I've not met them. So, and you're working. So, one time you get to really do something when you go out in the field and warm up for the game. So I go out, I come walking out to center field, like the players, they meet kind of in center field there, hey, good to see you, whatever. I went out there and I said, hey, come on over. And they're like, oh, no, I don't know. No. I go, what do you mean no? Like, why not? No. So I end up screaming across at him while there's three of my players and three of his players, hugging each other, laughing, carrying on, still doing their warm up, but they're part of it. And I said, hey, if these guys are doing it, then we can do it. Now get out here. But I don't know. I don't get it. Like, oh, these guys are going to say something about it. Like what? I don't. So it's much different. So I would say that they're tight. Now let me segue into look at what the athletic trainers have done. The NATA, they are in complete unity from top to bottom. I'm not saying they don't disagree with each other, but they're all on board, and that's where they've got their stability, right? They defend each other, the whole thing. I'm not saying they like each other either. They're like us. We have people we don't like and who we respect, but we also have people we don't like and don't respect. But that's what creates the chasm. With the athletic trainers, they don't do that. I think that's a great question, and I think we miss that part. Oh, it's licensure, it's all that. No, that's bullshit. That's not why. That's not why. It's because we're not unified. That's what it is.
I mean, it seems like part of the reasons you guys just expanded so quickly is what it sounds like. And then there just became multiple strength and conditioning coaches at each team. Cliques started to form. And it sounds like what you're saying is that you don't have a backbone like NATA that unifies all the strength coaches.
Well, there's like the CSCCA, which is mostly for the college, and then you
Yeah.
got the CSCS, which
Yeah.
is essentially for everyone's, and then you got USA
Weightlifting.
weightlifting, yep, and then there's like a USA track and field, which it's not really great, but some organizations tend to accept that, and then obviously each country has their own, which obviously we're just talking about the US right now, but
Yeah.
like, how do you how do you fix that when you got the two main branches of the NSCA and CSCCA? Like they're not going anywhere. So
No.
how do you fix that?
Well, I think with the CSCCA, the new group they have in there, they're not going to join with anybody. We made some inways with Scott Bennett, and I helped form a relationship, and I thought we would come together and come to an idea, but unfortunately, things happened there, and leadership had changed. I doubt there's going to be any getting together of anybody. But again, remember, Michael, the groups that you mentioned aren't governing bodies, right? They're organizations. The NATA is a governing body. That's the two differences, right? And the NSCA, and I know people, take different sides one way or another. They are not promoting workplace conditions and the professional side of that. That's not what they do. They never have been. They are a reference. They are um, a standards, a standard of care sort of thing, and setting up you know certifications like the CSCCA. Like they're not a governing body either, but they're a group that has a test that's accredited. And they originally started out with just focusing on college strength coaches, which is the CS in their title. The NSCA is a little more global, and they are interested in being the hub of strength and conditioning knowledge and expertise, that sort of thing. So I mean, I don't know how you're going to do it. I mean, so for instance, if you look at the NATA, and I think their profession enables it a little bit more, there's a standard of practice, a standard of care that goes along. There's nothing that goes outside. So it's not like, hey, I do sets of 20 and I do 4 sets of 5. Like that's that's different, right? So you can't standardize that. There's I hate the term there's a million ways to skin a cat because I think that's bullshit too. I think there's one good way to skin a cat, and then there's 999,000 other ways to do it, I suppose, right? But there's a bunch of programs that work. Let's just say that. Let's take a look at football. I mean, the top 20 teams, they essentially do the same thing, but they're not doing the exact same thing, right? They're all doing a little bit of this and that and the other thing. So, but they all win. So you can't say, hey, you need to do this. But we know through the science and application of rehabilitation and uh, medical care that this is generally what you're going to do with ultrasound. This is generally what you're going to do with hot tub, cold therapy, and all these other things. I mean, we've got the science behind that, and that's a standard of care. We know what happens when you don't care like that, right? Um,
Well, like a lot of the stuff that you mentioned, it sounds like And, a lot of the stuff in the strength and conditioning world is there just to tick a box, but whether or not you have it or not is not necessary to getting hired. So you got people listening to this going, well, crap. Like, I am a young strength coach. I'm getting pulled left, right, and center. I got my head strength coach, which is teaching me one way of doing things. And if I'm in football, I'm probably going to copy that for the rest of my career unless I become my own person, which doesn't really happen that often. So, like, how do I differentiate myself? Because the NATA you have to get. If you want to be an athletic trainer, you have to get it. Like, not a lot of Americans would know that in Australia, the Australian Strength and Conditioning Association, like, you have to be a certain level of accreditation, or like you can't be a strength coach because it's basically mandated at the federal level, right? And I have no idea if the federal government in Australia has fined any of these professional organizations in Australia for hiring
Right.
someone that isn't accredited. But I imagine these organizations won't do that. They don't want to take that risk. But the whole point is that that's never going to happen in the US because the US is a very complicated country with many different, 50
Oh,
different countries, you know what I mean? So my
yeah,
point
yeah.
is, what does a young strength coach, like, what the hell are they meant to do with all the information that we're talking about today? And then they feel a bit disillusioned and go, you know what? My credentials is not going to get me a job. It's who I know. There's people out there that are in jobs that aren't credentialed or don't have the skill set, but they're still in high paying jobs.
Yeah.
What the hell am I to do? Like, how do you answer that, Bob? What advice?
Wow. That's a great question. I mean, I, well, first of all, I don't completely subscribe to the way you get a job is it's who you know. I mean, I understand that, but
More often than not, it does happen, though. Let me
no,
make
but here's my point, Michael. My point is, if you're not any good, nobody cares who you know, right?
it true. Yeah,
So at some point, somebody knows that, yeah, I know that person and I worked with them, and they go, oh, that guy only got hired because that guy knew who he was. Well, he's not going to hire somebody crappy. I mean, there's something that person, that group, that team, that school thought you were good at. So, and it just so happens that, while familiarity breeds contempt sometimes, it also breeds success, right? I know this person, we can get to work right away. I know who he is, how he is. And it stops the whole, touchy feely, 1 or 2 year little window where you kind of have to watch what you do and then they got to kind of watch you. And so, uh, you know, again, I think it goes back to the same old, you know, gripe about my salary and all that stuff. Like, hey, I think it's the, I think it's the same thing that some of the coaches, in a way, it's akin to the saying, you want to play more, then play better. So I say, you want to make more money, then be better. I mean, they're not just handing money out to people who are awful. I'm not saying they're models, and I'm not saying they're the best strength coaches that ever, but they're getting some result because they're getting paid a
yeah,
lot of money for the football side. The other side's a little different because now, well, I mean, now the landscape has completely changed. I mean, I think for the Olympic sports, if you're not the basketballs or men's, or if you're not the basketballs or football, you're not on their mind as much as that group, right? So that money is going to be now, you know, siphoned off for salaries and for the players. That's it. It's not pretty simple. I mean, if you're not believing that, then you're going to think that I'm going to grow hair tomorrow morning. So that's not a good way to start. And if you think, oh, that doesn't matter, I should still get money, then again, you're not being realistic. That's you're lucky that they keep other sports, and those other sports are going to have to pitch into at some point, to get better at football because the reason some of these other sports on the Olympic side are being able to survive is because of the income that football and basketball bring.
for sure. Yeah. Well,
So it's
let me throw this at you because I've heard this a lot, and you've obviously gone on the record a lot recently about saying that leadership roles in college, like athletic directors, should be strength coaches or at least athletic trainers or whatever. But the question or the statement I hear from a lot of strength coaches is, this is such a hard job because we don't have a true metric of what success means. Is it injuries? Is it wins or losses? Is it getting fit? Is it this or that? But we're the
Yep.
first people to get fired. So like, what's
Yep.
your response to that when you hear that out there? Because like you've been around, you said 42 plus years. So
Hmm.
clearly your longevity is your level of success, right? But
Right.
there are
I think
many
so.
successes over the years to have kept you in that job for 40 plus years. So like what in your mind, like what makes a successful strength coach?
So you, you have to choose, and you laid out a couple of the parameters. Is it fitness? Is it injury reduction? Is it where is it? You can pick any of those, and you can measure them, right? So when people say it's hard to measure a strength coach, I don't think so at all. I don't think so at all. I think that you can put down exactly what you want and get results. I mean, for me, if I'm the director, I'm looking at, are we jumping higher and running faster? That's all I need to know. If we're not doing that, then we're not doing much. On the other hand, you've got to lay that out there. At the same time, at some point there may be something that is contrasting, right? So you may have a team, we've seen it in baseball, teams, with a high injury rate that are winning games. Well, they're fixing some of that injury rate with just throwing money at new players, just get somebody else, right? So that's a little different. So the waters get muddied when you say, hey, there's teams that win have winning coaches on there. I don't agree with that because that means that, well, the teams that lose have losing coaches. Well, I don't agree with that either. I
Yeah.
mean, there's plenty of great strength coaches who are on losing teams. There's plenty of good offensive coordinators and managers and that are great that are on bad teams. They just sometimes it just doesn't line up for them. So I think you can measure it. And again, how do you measure it? With great leadership. That's how you measure it. I'm absolutely convinced. I had this talk with Devin McConnell, who's with the new
Yeah.
Utah team,
Team, yeah.
very good friend of mine, and he's the high performance manager for them. And we were just talking about, how do you figure out, how you're measuring things, right? That sort of deal. And I think you when you have the right leadership in place, that's where you go. And I told him, I said, I'm absolutely convinced now that it's just a matter of leadership at every place, at every job, not just our jobs. It's the same in the car industry, it's in the financial world, it's in the construction, whatever it is, right? What you see at the lower levels and even collegiately or professionally, the director of strength and conditioning is at the lower leadership level. I mean, we know that, right? Because you got general managers, vice president, all that stuff. But when we see bad strength and conditioning, when we see bad nutrition, that's not the problem. That's a symptom of the problem. The symptom of the problem is leadership. Who hired that person? Who's evaluating that person? Who's holding that person accountable? That's where we see. I'm not saying that the nutritionist is not bad, but why are they still there?
Yeah, I got you.
And so that's a leadership thing, and it's not always straight up leadership too. So we also see this in athletics where you wonder why a player got traded or didn't get traded, or how come the college is building a brand new building but the assistant strength coach makes 50 grand and can't get a raise,
Mm.
right? Well, first of all, if you're smart enough, you know that those are different line items, and I know, Evan, you know what line items are, right? I mean, these things are boxed,
That's
right? So
fine.
it doesn't necessarily mean like, hey, I got this group of salaries, but I can't get a good camera. Those are two different things, right? So I think we realize how that is, first of all. But there's no doubt in my mind that this whole thing is a leadership deal. When you look at the high performance model is the perfect example, Michael, and I've screamed and yelled at you through your earpiece a million times about it. It has nothing to do with you, but I just really get you know, emotional about it because we've seen these jobs, and so it's a big deal, right? You're talking about guys who are making 3, 4, 500 grand a year as the high performance coach, right? High performance director. They go on a 3-year contract and they get fired in the second year. How's that possible?
Well, yeah.
Well, it could be many reasons, but one of the reasons is poor leadership, not him or
Yeah.
her, but the person above him. So it starts like that every time, right? So it's almost you know what a fractal is, right? So a fractal is a piece of it's this identical piece of the bigger piece. It's like the snowflake thing, right? Everything's a piece. So let's start at the very bottom. Let's just go strength and conditioning. Let's say we have a bad strength and conditioning program. Okay, is it the director's fault? Well, I mean, I guess that's the first place to start. The question is, who did he hire and who did he vet and why did he hire them? Okay.
Yeah.
Then it goes to the next person. The person has oversight of the director. All right, it's bad strength and conditioning. Is it the strength and conditioning director's fault? I don't know. But I got to find out how did he do, and if he didn't do it, right? And so it just keeps going up. So
Right.
there's lots of situations where that sometimes the leadership is not the guy who should be leading, it's somebody else above him or somebody else above him. But in the end, it's that, especially with this high performance role and some of the strength and conditioning and PT roles we've seen, Evan and Michael, that, you know, bad hiring processes, no vetting. Your committee is vetting for a high performance director, and there's not one performance um, practitioner in the interview. How's
Right.
that happen?
Right. Well, what do you do if you're the practitioner,
Yeah.
you want to be successful, you want your team to be successful, and you're dealing with bad leadership? Like, what do you do? Because if that's the ultimate way you're being measured,
Right.
you have to be able to do something. Just managing your manager kind of thing.
You have a choice not to be there, right? So, I mean, that's one of the choices that people they automatically eliminate it. And the reason I say that is because they don't talk about it. Like my guy doesn't do this, and I don't have this, I don't have that. Like, dude, why are you still there then? Like what? And look, if you said, "Hey, man, I got to pay the bills," I'd say no better reason than that, right? But here's what I say. You can't really manage the manager. You have to. It's again, if you go back to sports, the way you get to play more is to make the head coach happy. That's all, right? So whatever you got to do that, you got to do. Now, at some point, that may not be what you're going to do anymore because it's just not what you believe in. It's not one of your principles. And that's okay too, right? But in the end, there is the chance if everything's just right, then there is a chance that you're pretty good and the person above you is not.
Right.
Now it's up to you. What are you going to do? And so I'm just saying, make sure that you logically figure that out. And again, I say, if you're saying, hey man, I got to pay the bill, I got two kids, all that, then I'm totally with you, bro.
That's
You have my,
answer.
yeah, I mean, you have my support. But if it's some, crappy answer, which is the ones I receive, like, hey, listen, I think both of you would agree, just saying how bad everything, that's not a stance. That's not a protest. Nobody would ever consider like, oh wow, he's talking bad about me. I think I'm going to change my ways. Like, it's a waste. It's a waste of time. So I just think you have to, put things in place, work hard, and hope things work itself out. I don't think it's happening as much as we should have it show. I mean, the fact that people are getting fired in 2 years shows it's complete chaos above that level, that they have no idea what that person's doing. They wouldn't know if he or she is good or bad.
Right.
So and you got to be at a place that you're appreciated, and there's no way that it's very difficult to be appreciated when you're interviewed by people that don't know what you do and then they hire you. I mean, you're grateful for the hire, but you got to think like these people really don't know what I do, and so now you got to go from there. I think the difficulty lies there, but I'm absolutely convinced it's all leadership. And when you're able to thrive, if all of us were in a position where we could thrive, we'd hope that we'd be really successful, you know. And again, Michael, when you said, how do you measure success? The people that are, the entrepreneurial sector, while they're receiving funds, I think the people who are funding that group probably they all don't have the same identical principle of success, right? I mean, some are just saying, I need my money back. I need my money to grow. Some of these investors probably, like just people who are philanthropists or otherwise have a vested and personal interest. I'm going to donate money to this cancer center. My mom and my sister died from cancer, right? So they're not so much concerned about the money as they are the outcome, right? So you once you identify what success is, your formula is going to have to equal that. And if you don't do that, you're going to have some problems.
Right. Well, going back just a bit, we're sort of talking about, and something I wanted to talk about on this podcast. We're talking about how the strength and conditioning industry is expanding, what the future looks like. Kind of identified some of the issues so far. I'm curious, in your opinion, what are some of the like invisible barriers that strength coaches like face? I know you just mentioned like, okay, we have bad leadership. You should leave your job. Like, what are you doing? Right. That's an example of one. What are
Right.
some others?
Well, that's funny you mentioned that invisible barrier. I will tell you the one invisible barrier I know for sure is that there's some artificial ceiling on how old you need to be a strength and conditioning coach.
Yeah, I got you.
Now, I've happened to bust that barrier. I don't really know anybody. I mean, I think Jimmy Radcliffe and I are the oldest guys doing it that I know of. I mean, maybe a couple in some other countries, but here in the States, I'm 67. I think Jimmy and I are about the same age. But you got to remember now, those 7 months, I didn't get a call, a text, a nothing. And my resume's pretty good. But what's even better is the names that I'm putting down in that first paragraph that so-and-so asked me to call you, or you can reference it. I mean, I'm talking about the best of the best, the very best of the best. And I don't give a shit who else thinks they got it. I got more. Not nothing. Even out of, so even out of respect for the names I put in there, I should have got something back. And that tells me, okay, so it's not just that. It's what's happening above that, right? These newer groups, and I'm not saying younger, but they tend to be younger. This new group of leaders, they don't want to be a total leader. They want to be a leader in as I can just tell people what to do. That's not a leader. In fact, if you're a really good leader, you hardly tell anybody what to do, right? What you do is you ask them, what can I do for you? You're a facilitator. You're a facilitator and you're someone who holds everybody accountable. What does that mean? That means I can make Michael great. I can make Evan great. You tell me what it takes to make you great. I want to make you great because that means we're all great and the people you serve, which are the athletes, are going to be great. And then the organization is going to be great. It's just, that's a real simple problem, right, to fix. But the accountability part, they don't want this new group, they don't want anything about to do with that. They don't want to be able to have a hard, difficult conversation, look at you in your eye and tell you like, hey, you're underperforming. Here's what we got to do, or this and that. They don't want to have anything to do with that, right? And so that's a problem. So I know for sure that, again, back to what I was saying, 7 months not getting anything back or getting some automated reply. Like, hey, let me tell you something. I don't usually say things about what I've done, but I will tell you, I'm owed an email back when I send you something, right?
Mhm.
You don't know who I am. That's your fault, not mine. But but I'm talking about people who do know who I am and they know the names that I'm putting in that first paragraph and they're not sending me something back. To me, that's cowardly. Tell anybody that you want to that I said that. You're a coward if you can't come back and say, now, that's HR. Really? So you're going to tell me that human resources is going to tell me that no, the best possible way to service people who are asking about employment here is to not answer them back. No,
Well, that's just kind of the culture these days, right?
I
Yeah,
think
So
so.
well, it's
I
because it's
think
like, the whole, essentially it's, in a crude term, it's just, you're being ghosted, so to speak, you know what I mean?
yeah.
And it's easier, like you said, like, you know, my parents' generation, probably your generation is the same. Like my parents are in their 70s and my dad just
Yep.
turned 80, so similar. But like that is a hard nosed, like I am talking through my thoughts is what comes out of my mouth. I have no sugarcoating, and if I hurt your feelings, toughen up, princess. That's sort of like my parents' generation. I grew up in that. Hence why I'm as blunt as they come, right? But there's got to be a filter on and off. But I always say to people, I'd rather you tell me bluntly yes or no than beat around the bush because it doesn't solve any problems. You know what I mean?
No, it
Because
doesn't. It
the
creates
reality
them.
of sport, every organization, whether you're winning or not, every organization has thousands of issues. The only difference is when you're winning, they're covered up,
Yeah,
just like, a mafia murder. It's all covered up, no one knows about it. But when you're losing, all that stuff comes to light, and everyone's like, well, where did this come from? Well, it was always here. We just never addressed it. You know what I mean?
right.
So it's because it's easier to not address problems because it's hard work to address problems. And it goes back to what I said before. That's why it's easier just to fire everybody instead of just bringing in the so-called leader of that organization and developing them because that takes time, right? You've
Right.
got 40 plus years of wisdom right now talking to us, but it's taken you 40 years to get that wisdom. You know what I mean? And all these
Yeah.
organizations don't want to wait 40 years. They don't even want to wait 4 minutes, let alone 40 years.
Well, yeah, I think the threshold of patience is much shorter than it is, because the payoff is so big. So I understand those two things battling each other out. At the same time, there's got to be a way to fix some of those things. So, one of those things, like I said, one of the hurdles is an artificial ceiling. I mean, to think that at some point at my age that I just forgot how to strength train and condition and sprint and jump and all that is absurd, right? It's an absurd notion, but somehow that's the way it goes. I mean, I don't know how that is. That's one of those hurdles that are out there. But I think the other hurdles are they're they're experiential. I think that a lot of these kids who are trying to get big time jobs don't understand like you can't just hop into that job. There's that job is where it is because it's requires experience and achievement, right? Not, oh, I've been doing this for 5 years. Okay, but what have you done in the 5 years? That's what I need to know if I'm going to hire you.
I had a conversation with a friend of mine literally in the last 24, 48 hours about how you've got the new sports science industry coming into the mainstream now and a lot more teams and schools around the country are now hiring for a quote unquote director of sports science or director of performance science or whatever iteration that they're looking for, right? But basically, it's just a sports scientist. Um, we're looking at these roles and people that are essentially entry level, and whatever the definition of entry level means, that could mean only a year or 2 years of experience, whatever that means, are getting these director type roles straight out from a GA ship or an internship, and boom, they're now a director of sports science because they're really good at coding or on an Excel spreadsheet. So that sort of like contradicts this statement about hey, like these people shouldn't be in those roles straight away because it takes a lot to get to them. Yet people are in those roles straight away. What do you say to that? Like, what do you say to organizations that are pulling the trigger on hiring very inexperienced people in these director roles from like just to fill a box on their staff?
Well, I think the first way that those people are filling those holes is probably it's the limitation is the salary, right? I mean, you're when you start creating a position, the salary is going to tell you a little bit about the profile, right? So it's like when I first started over here in the Valley, we're in Los Angeles, and back in 2019, the assistant strength coach was $50,000, $55,000. Now that's gone up since then. But the whole point of the matter is, all right, so who is that? Well, after years and years, I can tell you likely it's somebody who's single. If they're married, that's recently married, they have no kids, and they can hop into a one bedroom apartment and begin their job, right? And and so it's reversed. It's not one looking for the other, right? So then the rest is up to you. But if you're married with two kids and you take it, and like when I end up hiring the director at CSUN, who is now it's Ashley Samaniego, who's an unbelievable coach. He's a martial artist, great coach, huge into, he's got his master's in kinesiology, good into data and tech. Now he's the head strength coach for UCLA women's basketball. one of two only undefeated teams in the country right now. And he did that because he knew. Now, but if you look at this guy's background, he grew up in Guam, no plumbing most of his life,
Yeah.
right? And just battled his way out and said, "Hey, I don't want to do this anymore." Got himself into the Marines. So I'm gonna do. There's something better for me. Came out here, jumped into school, took the money that the Army pays you after you get out, put it to school, applied. When I got him, he had just got accepted to the police academy, and I had to beg him, "Don't go, man, because you can always go. Try this thing out here." So and he was great. So you have a choice, right? So I talked to an MLB lawyer one time about what I thought was some improprieties happening in the performance sector, and he ended up telling me like, "Well, unfortunately, we can't create any rules for stupid hires, so that we can't really make a law against that." And I said, "Wow." So again, Michael, you and I have talked about that before, and I think we've all had these conversations like, how the hell did so and so get that job? For a bunch of reasons, not necessarily that we didn't think they were any good, but for one of the reasons you talked about. He's young and all the way across the country, or never been exposed to the sport. Now we're seeing that all the time. Shit, if I'd have known that, I would have just stuck with croquet and got hired anywhere. But but now we see that happen. It's just, again, leadership. Okay, who posts that thing? Who's on the committee? Somebody's got to okay that at the top. It just don't go by.
Yeah.
And that's the whole idea, right? If you go back to look at, kind of going off the base a little bit here, but if you go back to look at the catastrophic events that have happened in college football, right? Guys are out there running in the humidity in the midsummer, and catastrophe happens. People say, "Oh, that guy's that strength coach or that athletic trainer or that head coach is terrible. That's their fault." Now, I'm not dismissing the fault of any culpability there, and I'm not specifically speaking to anything, but that's a leadership problem. Who hired those people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, who vetted those people? You think they just bumped their head and went outside and ran guys in the middle of the day? They've done that before,
Mm.
and so that's the same thing you're talking about. If this person's going to make that hire, and sometimes that works out, right? But what is the reason behind the hire? What are we looking at? And I think we have to be really careful, because we are the only ones that work with these people every single day. The athletic trainer doesn't, the therapist doesn't, the doctor doesn't, and some of the coaches don't either. But we see them every day. We're working with them every day. So there should be some value in that. And until that rears its head enough, we're going to see these kind of hires. And look, the other part of this whole ceiling thing that we talked about, Evan, somebody asked me, I think Rob Panarello asked me this, who we both know, and he's unbelievable mentor for me, and we're close friends. And he wanted to know it during that time, because we talked, and he said, "Let me ask you a question. Do you think there's any ageism going on?" And I thought about that for a minute, because, look, people have weaponized all this other stuff: race, creed, color, disabilities, age. They weaponize it, and it's bad, because there's people who are actually suffering great tragedies because of those things. So I was really careful to think about, is there ageism? Because that's a serious thing. And I actually figured it out quickly, like, I don't think so. I mean, they know who I am. They know how old I am. But frankly, 40 to 45-year-old athletic directors and GMs, they hang out with other 40-year-old guys. I mean, they don't know me. They can read about what we did. So that's the other part of why these inexperienced guys get hired. Michael and Evan, look at some of these GMs.
Yeah.
Look at these vice presidents. Look at these athletic directors. They're all young too.
Yeah.
And inexperienced.
Yeah. Well, I want to finish up on this, because I think this is quite important. So you see a lot on LinkedIn or other social media platforms where people look at strength coaching salaries, even athletic training salaries, and they take the low salaries as a level of disrespect for the industry, right? So in order to gain that respect, which in their mind means raising the salaries, like, what are some quick points on that you think that as a whole strength and conditioning needs to do? Because he said it's easy to whine and complain, or look at this organization, they're wanting 35K for an 80-hour week of a strength coach. no one does anything to change that. How do we raise that level of respect so that salary can then go from a 35K up to maybe a 60K? You know what I mean? Or whatever the standard should be. What are your thoughts there?
I'm looking for a pen because you're making my mind go hard right now. So first thing is the number one way to raise the salary and the respect, become a high performance director. That's exactly what you do. We don't, first of all, the people that are sitting in those chairs, many of them are unqualified. But of those that are qualified and those, there's no real strength and conditioning coaches doing that job. And so the perception will change just like they do, look what they're doing. They're putting athletic trainers in that spot. The perception of the athletic trainer is better than strength and conditioning. I don't care what you say. That's a fact, And so do we try to say, well, let's get better than the athletic trainers? No, that's not our goal. Let's get better as our profession. We have to do our profession first, right?
Mm.
And so I say, become a high performance director. Now you got a strength coach in there that can champion that position. I'm not saying they'll focus on it, but they'll know what that means and know how to. But now that guy just used to be a strength coach, which I thought I was able to do, and I did do, and kind of things have backed out of that a little bit now. But there were some roles getting produced like that. But I'm rewriting that how to fix strength and conditioning right now. And the number one thing is, if you want to make a change, become a high performance director. Now you're over all those performance units, your salary is going to be raised, and you are a visible guy who was a strength and conditioning coach by profession and now have transitioned into a bigger, more, valuable role. The other thing is, stop complaining if you're not going to do anything. It sounds whiny. It sounds pitiful. It's not helpful, and so we know what's wrong with it. It's easy to figure out what's wrong. And I've gotten to the point now where I'm online and people start, griping about their workplace conditions. Hey, that's not new. Griping about where you work is a problem. Is that new? Everybody in the world does it, from the shoe store at Macy's to whatever. They talk about, oh, this place sucks and my boss and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But what are you doing about it? And why are you still here? What have you done? So that's my answer now. What is your solution for this? I've got my solution and I know what I've done. What are you doing? So I think that's where this thing starts. And as far as somebody said, hey, somebody's taking that $50,000 down disrespectful, I say I would never, ever say that to anybody. You don't know why they're taking that job. You don't know, like me, like I end up taking 40-50% of my former salary. Like, oh, you shouldn't do that. Tell the light company, the electric company that. I can't, that ain't doing me any good. I'm not going to go down and do a dynamic warm up for the car loan company because I can't pay my loan now. Like, that's crazy. You never know why I wanted to do it, but and in the end, because of who we are as a group, somebody's going to take that job. Somebody's going to, and even the trainers now, they're in a position where, they could arguably say, hey, we're, under the same conditions, we work too long, we don't make enough, but there's still guys taking those jobs.
Yeah, there's always going to be someone taking that job, always.
Yeah, and so I don't think that has any effect at all. In fact, the only effect it has on the whole industry is now we don't have to worry about you because you're not even here. You didn't take the job.
Yeah.
You're gone. Go away. So I think the biggest hit is become a high performance director, keep working and work better, do something different, stand out. Don't be the guy that's just a regular scream and holler guy, bench press, squat, bench, whatever. Everybody's doing that. What makes you different? If you look at the guys who are vaulting up, we all know, even my friends who are way up here, they're different than everybody else.
Right.
That's the key.
What are some steps that people can do to become a high performance director?
Well, you got to start creating things. You have to be intrinsically motivated to start creating things on your own. So just whatever you want to do. So when I was in North Carolina State, I co-authored the group called it's been Champs. It's called Champs at some places, but it's just a group of everybody, a consortium of people that lead all the departments and come in and say, hey, what can we do for these kids? And well, how can we get better? And all that. I created that. We didn't have one. Now it's, not anything close to what I started before, but, starting to do that, get yourself in leadership roles and create something that's pushing, the profession in your direction, the profession and increasing the services of your clientele. In our case, it's, athletes, so whatever you're doing to make that better, keep going. And, and run if you're in the weight room, run it like a business. If you run it like a weight room, then you're like everybody else, make sure that you present a standard process. The one thing I did, we had an operations manual of what we did and how we operated for every unit, nutrition and sports medicine, blah, blah, blah. And, the good thing about the operation manual is it not only tells you what you do, but it tells you what you're not going to do. And I think that's a very important piece, what you're not going to do. So we start doing something, hey, we don't do that. Here's what we do. It's already in the paper. And we had it from, opening the door to closing the door at night and what happened in between. We got that all listed. And now you have this manual that you can take, and it's a template for any business, right? Like you have what would you call like a cheat sheet or a weekly sheet of just a short sheet of what's happening. Very like, so for instance, in our world, it'd be baseball, lifting 2 to 3 times a week, conditioning 2 times a week, and playing 2 games a week. That's good. And then you send that to your supervisor, just so they know what we're doing, what we have done, what we will do. Boom, 1 page. Just start creating things where people see that you're more than, chalk and sweat.
Well, Bob, thank you for coming on. I think we talked about a lot of good stuff as far as how to make the industry better, and I hope some young practitioners out there will pick some of this up and go out and create.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, this is great. Michael pressed every button I had right there. Now I got to go take a nap.
Yeah. No, I'm sure we'll have some future conversations. We'll keep pushing those buttons. I love it when you rant.
All right. Well, cool, man. Well, listen, guys, I appreciate you having me on. And my colorful language aside, I think the points were made well.
For sure.
Yeah. Thanks for jumping on, Bob. We'll look forward to the next one.